So, back then, when I was basically watching as many animated movies as I could from 2017 to do my top 8 best and worst animated films of 2017 list, one of the candidates for the worst list, today's subject, Spark a Space Tale, was a very easy candidate for that list. In fact, this movie right here was in like the bottom 4. The only films which I found worse than this one were Surf's Up 2 Wave Mania, Tom and Jerry Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and the Emoji Movie. And I did watch this one on my own, without anyone on the outside influencing any of my opinions, before you ask, and well, I knew that I was not the only one who had this sentiment in saying that this was a bad one, because not only is this movie one of the most infamous ones, but some have even said that it's the worst one out of every animated film from 2017. Some have even said that they thought that this film is worse than the Emoji Movie. I don't think I'd go as far as to say that it's worse than the Emoji Movie, considering the fact that I've yet to have rewatched that film, but I can certainly confirm that I really did not like this movie. Back in 2017, when I first watched it, I said that it was because of how cliche it is, and for other reasons that I'll be getting to in just a bit, but in retrospect, I was glad that I didn't put that list out because I went too far into the intricate details about how cliche it is, to the point of commenting on Chung's species, as if pig characters have never been done in retrospect. But when revisiting this movie after several years of being occupied with other things, this movie only soured upon rewatch because it's bad, and I mean really, really bad. Do I think that this is the worst one I reviewed? Far from it, actually, because this one feels more broken rather than actively malicious, which is why I find this movie better than Escape from Planet Earth or Raya the Last Dragon, but that's definitely not much of a compliment, because while I do think that the Emoji Movie, Tom and Jerry Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and Surf's Up 2 Wave Mania are worse, because they are more lazy or just feel like a commercial for WWE or apps, Spark a Space Tale is the most broken and incoherent out of all of them. So, what is the premise of this movie? Well, this movie is basically what you'd get if you took Star Wars and just replaced everyone with monkeys. The plot revolves around this kid named Spark. He basically dreams of being this noble warrior who goes on missions, in spite of the fact that he has a lack of experience when it comes to this. But oh no, his guardians say that he's not ready yet, and that he can't become a warrior yet. But after Spark basically goes behind one of his guardians' back, and goes to the palace to accept Vixen Chung's mission from the Queen, Spark ends up putting the entire galaxy at risk by leading a space kraken directly to the evil emperor named Emperor Zong, leading them to being thrown into a wormhole as a result. To really get started on pointing out the issues that I have with this movie, it's actually something that is so major that I even noticed it when I first watched this movie when I was 15 years old. This movie has just as many plot holes in it as Swiss cheese. There are a lot of questions that are raised in this movie that either don't get explained at all, or the movie doesn't even make things clear to the audience what even happened in the middle of the prologue and when we first see these characters. Instead, the movie decides to occupy itself with nothing but boring and useless filler that could have been used to patch up the plot holes that are left behind. As the movie goes on, the movie introduces plot points that just make the opening sequence of this movie so much more confusing than it already is. I know that this is going to go into heavy spoiler territories, but I doubt that anyone is going to care about spoilers for the monkey Star Wars mockbuster anyway. The queen that assists Emperor Zong is Spark's mother, so where was she in the prologue then? The movie explicitly states that all of the kingdom was sucked into a wormhole, which also includes the king, whom was in the wormhole for so long that he ended up passing away in there. By the movie's own logic, shouldn't the queen also be in there? Once again, the movie does not explain this in the slightest, and anything that it does explain to the audience is not shown at all. I know that I'm harping on this part of the movie way too much, but the backstory is what carries the weight of the story, and because the plot began like this, it leaves the movie with these unfixable holes that are never patched up at all, like the equivalent of poking a hole into a pool, causing it to leak water out. Let's think of a hypothetical scenario real quick. Imagine if in, say, Finding Nemo, instead of letting the prologue finish, it just cuts to the beginning of the film after the barracuda knocks Marlin out after it fades to black, and then just mention the backstory in passing instead of actually showing it. That would have caused some serious issues because it gave the logical explanation explanation as to why Marlin became overprotective towards his son, and well, we got a ton of context to what happened regarding Coral, as well as her and Marlin's kids. And I didn't even start getting into the actual contents of the movie yet, and the movie is already a jumbled up and broken down mess. On the surface level of things, this movie doesn't really seem like it's going to do anything all that egregious. The movie is incredibly cliche and predictable, as just like Rock Dog, Leap, and The Star, this is yet another "a dream of being someone, but others tell me I don't have what it takes" story that had been done so many times in 2017 alone. And the film is literally just Star Wars but with monkeys, and for most of the film, barely anything of interest really happens. They take the most basic and straightforward narrative that you could imagine and stretch it out as much as possible, and the characters are the most cardboard cutout and stock character types that you could ever think of. Vix and Chunk are barely given any sort of development in the movie, and Spark's only character trait is that he wants to go on an adventure, but he doesn't know what he's doing most of the time. But that doesn't sound too different from what we've seen in movies like Rock Dog or The Boss Baby. However, the thing that makes this movie skyrocket to become worse than those two is how incoherent that this movie is, and how none of the characters' motivation feel like they're justified or make any sense. I already proved this just a second ago with how this movie fails to explain anything that it lays out in the prologue, but this movie is incoherent in other ways. You know, for a movie that is set in space, it seems to not understand the basic idea of space in general. This garbage dump asteroid that Spark, Vix, and Chunk live on is not a planet in the slightest. When you basically walk around on an asteroid, it's not going to have the ability to show daylight like how Spark's planet is now. In fact, it's going to look like how you are when you stand on the moon, especially since part of Spark's planet have now been separated into fragments, so it should not be able to show daylight at all. And with how much time that this movie wastes, it's honestly bewildering that they didn't use any of that time to flesh any of its characters out. Chunk's only personality is that he likes to eat. That is the beginning and end of his character. And Vix is basically just the strong girl. That is literally it. And the humor is also completely non-existent. One joke that is run into the ground, which was not funny in the first place, is characters constantly saying that they're going to kick some asteroids. You see, the joke is that they're saying the word that is related to the large rock that killed the dinosaurs, rather than the word that is used to describe something that is being a donkey. This is the peak of our comedy, and you are simply a dunce if you don't find this joke to be comedy gold. Also, like Shark Tale and Sahara, the movie has literally no reason to even star animals in the slightest. You literally could have just made the characters into humans and nothing would change at all. I mean, in this movie, Spark knows what a zoo is, but he's a monkey himself. Also, could we technically say that what Spark did in the sequence, where he taunts the kingdom's guards by saying that they belong in the zoo, classify as racism? Oh wait, if this movie starred humans, people would have only accused this movie of ripping off Star Wars more than it did before. But the worst part of the movie is in regards to how the film is structured, and how very poorly executed that the family relationship between Spark, Vix, and Chunk are. Spark's attitude and motivations are all over the place. His attitude switches from being the typical teen that just seems fed up with his loved ones, to suddenly being all naive and clueless when he rushes into doing this adventure in a way that could only be described as mood whiplash. I've seen a lot of people who have taken issue with this, saying that Spark acts like a brat throughout the film, but I don't really see that throughout the movie. Plus, the reason as to why Spark acts this way is because he's constantly left alone with the robot most of the time. No, the real issue is with Vix and Chunk. The beginning of the film gives us a very bad first impression of them, where it's literally stated that they left Spark alone during his birthday because they were busy working most of the time, and Vix has the gall to claim that Spark isn't ready yet during the training sequence, but maybe he'd be ready if you guys just took some time off to train him, because they don't seem to have jobs at all, and their absent-minded nature just gives me vibes of the parents from Rugrats, where they constantly just let their kids wander off with no parental supervision. Same thing even applies applies here. Vix blaming Spark for the fact that the world was put in peril was the worst part of the movie because Spark wandering off was entirely their fault in the first place. Like, hey genius, he wouldn't have gotten the idea to go out on his own if you and Chunk did your jobs as his guardians and kept your eyes on him more. And because of how terribly paced and written that this movie is, Vix and Chunk, after they basically blamed this 13-year-old boy as the reason why the universe was put in danger, they instantly go back on their anger towards him in one of the most unrealistic ways possible. This wasn't an anger in the heat of the moment thing. They literally regret snapping at him seconds later, despite the fact that this is not how anger functions with any person, or even a cartoon character. But at the exact same time, you can't really blame Vix for getting angry in this sequence because what Spark did was also very stupid because he essentially doomed the entire galaxy by running off and finding the space Kraken with the Kraken Finder instead of taking it to Vix and Chunk where it will be put in safe hands. But it's also Chunk and Vic's fault because they didn't keep their eyes on him and left all of the work to an elderly robot that doesn't have the energy to be able to be his guardian. And while it was incredibly stupid of him to bring the Kraken back with him, he also didn't know that Emperor Zong was gonna end up finding the space Kraken to begin with. But like, this sequence where Vix puts all the blame on Spark is resolved so fast that it legitimately doesn't feel like it's genuine at all. There's no scene where Vix apologizes to Spark. They're on good terms with each other again just because they are. Was this movie written in one draft or something? Because the film doesn't feel like they had any sequences rewritten at all. I mean, Rock Dog may have felt like a 30-minute special that was stretched out to movie length, but this movie straight up feels unfinished. And just like what I pointed out with Lewis and the Aliens, the fact that this movie was able to be given a theatrical release just makes it a lot worse. And being someone who does live in the United States, I can confirm that this movie did play in theaters over here, and it was even advertised. I remember back in 2017 when I watched new episodes of Harvey Beaks, which I recorded on my DVR when the show was moved to Nicktoons, and advertisements for this movie played during the commercial breaks, apparently, in spite of the fact that the movie's release was probably very limited and pulled from theaters quickly, because I remember when me and my mom went to see Smurfs The Lost Village on April 22nd of that year, and it didn't play at all in that theater, and considering the fact that this movie literally came out 2 weeks after The Boss Baby and a week after Smurfs The Lost Village, there were two other options that people could go with, but even then, Smurfs The Lost Village also didn't do very good, and The Boss Baby was also pretty bad. God, 2017 was not a good year for animated movies. And so, with two other options that people could go with, which were released in the exact same time frame, you could imagine how this movie did. Only making $1 million on a $40 million budget. And that was probably for the best, because if not for the Emoji Movie, this film would easily be the worst theatrically released animated film that was released that year that is not a direct-to-DVD film. The film is incoherent, the characters' attitudes and actions change constantly like a light switch, the characters are flat and not given any sort of chance to develop, and the film generally comes across as a diet version of Star Wars, but broken and genuinely has continuity issues.
Coming up next, it's Roger.
Everything